welcome back to the Geek on My Sleeve channel. This is Geek Out number 57, Tech Mage, the first book in the Magitech Chronicles. And wow, by Chris Fox. Yeah, it's it was a good one, but it was kind of hard to describe, so to speak. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. First of all, good call on um, picking this title. I know we had been going on a lit RPG binge, having a lot of fun doing that. Um, I don't know if it's just because this was a palate cleanser or it was just like really that good, or the simple fact that Chris Fox got me when he set up the dedication to Margaret Weiss, and Tracy Hickman. Um, they do the Dragonlance series. I know you've listened to one of the trilogies. Is that right?
Yeah, something about a little girl who was actually controlling things. Who wasn't a
Yeah.
little girl, she was like an ancient demon or whatnot.
Going from memory, I think the trilogy is War of Souls and was it Mina?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's later in the timeline. Um, Dragonlance was one of my first big epic fantasy series that pulled me in. I was a late bloomer when it came to reading. I know you like to brag about how you don't think you've actually ever finished a complete physical book, but
Oh, yeah.
Dragonlance is one of the series that I actually physically read and did multiple trilogies, multiple generations. I even got to like the second generation where I was reading about the kids of the main characters and all this stuff. And um, yeah, like the scope of their stories is just massive. And I clearly see the inspiration here in the Tech Mage series. So before I get
So
too
that's
far into
what.
that speculation, we were going to try our best to do a spoiler-free recap of it, right? So
Sure.
you have the genre of, we'll just say Star Wars, where it's not clear sci-fi, but there's the sci-fi base with the military fiction with the fantasy component. And then you pretty much have a war between the spawns of the gods and um, very early on, the main character, I just know her as the Major, and I think of um, what you call it, Ghost in the Shell, where we have the main character of the Major. I think her name's Gloria. Does that sound right? And she's essentially the equivalent to a half elf. Um, and she gets this message from a god, and she gets summoned to one of her father's wives, mistresses. Um, Not sure the extent there, but yeah, it pretty much tells her, hey, your upcoming battle, this bloke is instrumental in it. Go find him. She's like, I don't know what you're talking about, a battle. Our spaceship and our guys are being held together with spit and bubblegum. We're not ready for any fight. Help me find what we later find out as her half brother, and um, I can, basically get the resources I need to go do a fight. And then come chapter one, we get introduced to Aaron, Gloria's half brother Kaz, and they've been mind wipe and they're pretty much set to go on this, what do you want to call it? Equivalent to a dungeon crawl.
So this is where I think we differ in our descriptive opinions.
Go for it.
I would say this book is hard to quantify. If you say fantasy, yes, it deals with magic elements and dragons, so fantasy, but it does it in a very unique way where you can give anyone who has magical power a weapon and they can pull the trigger on the weapon and it's like connected to them to where it pulls their mana out of them, but then after they get trained they can become a true mage and they can cast it independently of the weapon, so it's like sci-fi for tech elements, but then it's like fantasy for magic elements. And then it does the whole child of prophecy at the beginning, like you were talking about, where I guess that's in both for, it's more fantasy than it is sci-fi, but it opens up child of prophecy, and then it's just, yeah, it's all over the place and it's very unique because then it goes also kind of into like a Greek mythology, god level where dragons are so powerful, and then there are multiple factions. Long story short, they end up fighting because no one can ever be happy, especially with such immense power. And their children are tasked with keeping their body safe because if the dead you can't kill, not dead god ends up having a human come in contact with it, that's how they get their magic. So you can go to several different god, not god, dead god places and obtain this power. And it's very unique where you literally get to see the mind of the god and how they perceive things. And so you get to get those different feels, and yeah, it
If if I had to give a quote unquote elevator pitch, describe this book slash series, I would say think fantasy slash Lord of the Rings, because everybody knows Lord of the Rings, and then
mm,
go into the future where technology has now advanced to the point where we've gone out and claimed the stars, right? Like it very much feels like we've taken the fantasy realm and pushed it into the far future with crazy technology, but there's still the magic components.
and that's where like things just get wonky because I love lit RPGs
Mm-hmm.
and the idea of trapped in another world, like no, no, that didn't happen. That it wasn't what was happening, but our main guy literally wakes up with his memory wiped.
I want to talk a
But
bit
but
about
the
that.
book is leading up to, it is information that you want to know, and you kind of get a moral compass of him now. And I guess a good example for me is Tom, or Tomalus the barbarian from the Divine Dungeon series. He has a persona that you come to know and love, and then he ends up getting his memories back, and he's similar, but he's not. And so I'm curious to see how that develops.
I really want to pick your brain on the whole mind wiping concept because we got to see the impact of that with Nara, because she was just an utter manipulative, pain in the butt person up until the mind wipe. And then by the end, she's almost a romance interest, where at the beginning, Aaron's contemplating how he can kill her.
Well,
But
but also
go ahead.
the Aaron being a joke on Nara backwards, but Nara was initially a reinstall or a mind wipe.
Imprint.
So that's where you run into with hard drives, there's a read and write capacity. So you can only read and write to the same location so many times before that information is corrupted. And it depends on where you're writing it. Like, does it always go to the same spot? Like, is the origin? Or is it chronological where we're currently in the space time now, so all the other stuff is still saved? I don't
Mm,
know. Anyway, not
mm.
relative.
Well, we find out through Kaz later that there are ways to restore some of your memories.
Or we
Um,
also find that out through Aaron.
well, he has.
He's
Um,
right at the beginning when he picks up his void powers, he's inside the mind of the god and getting impressions, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I can totally get rid of this." And then because he bonded with his sword, that he went all, oh, I was gonna say Kamehameha, but that's not quite right.
they they imply that your subconscious stuff is still there, right? Clearly.
Yeah, because
Um,
otherwise we'd have to teach him from childhood,
right,
how to walk and whatnot.
right. So there's some
It's
subconscious
essentially like
things.
waking up with amnesia, where you're like, where am I? Who am I? But you still know how to function. And then you get like little impressions or
The
like, yeah.
Yeah, and this book does a good job showing instead of telling. You don't get a lot of the extra elements explained as much, but we do kind of get to see some of the pieces. Go ahead.
Or so that was one of the things that we always read them multiple times. And my first time through, the beginning was pretty disorienting, where the
Hmm.
prologue was Child of Prophecy, and then within the first couple chapters, our new main guy starts off Mind Wipe, and then our big antagonist is getting Mind Wipe too. And then there's a lot of like connecting the dots between the prophecy, and it kind of bounced around, but going back, like, okay, there was a lot of good elements that were introduced early on that now it all makes sense.
I'm with you. One of the many reasons why I enjoy audiobooks so much is because one, we can listen to it at faster speed, and two, I'm able to multitask while doing it and typically able to follow it pretty easily. But I forget what exactly I was doing, but I typically hang out around 2.5 speed. And I had to go back and re-listen to the first couple chapters because it was just like, okay, hold on. Like we got all these other things going on and now we're in a completely different place and like there's all this other stuff. And I'm like, let me just go back and
The
re-listen to the beginning. And
The one thing I felt like wasn't really fleshed out in the first book, which it doesn't have to be because the first book is for setting up the world and the environment and the initial stuff. But
mhm,
normally for me, with my lit RPG love, is I get duplicate or doubled names where, like, hey, IRL, you're named this, in the game, you're named that. But what
mhm,
kept confusing me is the gods and the dragons, because for one of our big conflicts, they keep calling the dragons worms. So it's like, is it a dragon? Is it a worm? Is it a caterpie? Is it a butterfree? Like, what's going on here, kind of deal, as well
mhm.
as they have babies. And we get one line in there where I had to chuckle, where the dragon worm guy was like, "Oh, you think you're winning? I will destroy you and put my larva inside you," or something. I was like, Brandon Sanderson would be proud there. I was totally a
Eh,
Starsight line.
oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But that's what kept confusing me. And then they talk as if like the gods were all powerful and had multiple different branches of magic. But then when they're interacting with each of the dragons, they pretended as if they only had one. Like, you are a binder. And then we get into combat and
Mm,
it's like they're throwing counter spells and all this extra, and it's just that's where it was a little hard for me to track, and I know it's just going to be fleshed out more. Um, yeah,
I think for me, again, the nod to the writers of Dragonlance kind of made me go back, and it's been ages since I've read it, so I'll probably misquote some stuff, but just the way they have it structured in that series, I kind of transferred over that template and saw a lot of similarities. Because in the Dragonlance, warning spoilers ahead on Dragonlance, um, they pretty much have like the gods, and there's a balance between all the powers, you know, the good, the dark, the neutral. And we saw a little bit of that with this one when he goes and gets his void magic, where he's then, you know, in the mind of the god, where we get to see the death of the good god or one of the good gods. And he's pretty much like, oh no, like if we destroy each other, it'll interrupt the balance, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll just let you guys take me out. And then there's kind of like the levels of gods, and then
I
like
guess that's
their
not what I
children.
got.
Um, Go ahead.
Sorry, or that I felt like it was a subterfuge tactic, and it goes back to the whole like binding and the prophecy where he was charging his spell to do stuff, and he knew, yeah, I can take out some of my attackers, go down fighting, but
Hmm.
if I don't and instead I cast this spell to change the flow of time and space to do 1,000 micro actions to make one mega action and prophesize and
Well, that was a different god. The one I was
oh, okay,
talking
yeah, yeah,
about
yeah.
was
That's right.
when Aaron interacts with the void magic and
Yeah.
acquires that.
Okay. Yeah, I was
And
thinking the other one
yeah, I think you're thinking of the one
at
that
the
they
end.
interact with at the end.
Yeah.
And in that sense, like that's where I see kind of that overlap, because the way they were talking about it was almost like programming in a way of how these gods set up these spells and whatnot of, you know, like all this other stuff. But yeah, for me, they didn't explain a whole lot, but I was kind of bringing over the architecture of Dragonlance in just kind of like how they did some of the stuff with the gods and the children and the different abilities there. Um, so I'm really curious to see how he fleshes that out. With
Oh,
that,
yeah. I'm
with
curious
that,
to see
go ahead, go ahead.
how he fleshes it out as well. But he's got like 8 books of the series out,
Hmm.
and this is just the beginning. So
Yes,
yeah,
yes. That being
but
said,
that's one of those like I'm so excited to see where it goes from here, but we already accomplished our goal. You know, from the prologue, you're the child of prophecy. Just kidding. You need all these other people to help, but you're going to orchestrate it. But then one of the guys dies. But wait, we did this other thing, and now we brought him back to life. Yeah.
and that's what you want from a good story, right? Like make the promises and wrap it up in this book while introducing us to the overarching larger story of this grand war, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And
Completed one goal that sets us up for everything else, and
yeah,
our
yeah,
biggest
and we still
fear.
have the issue with the major, and we'll get to see some of the larger politics there. Like we kind of got introduced to some of that stuff. We'll get to see like some of the larger war pieces with the worms and everything, because we just had one battle on one world and got introduced to like the magic and how that all works. So we still have
The
those larger overarching stories. Go
the
ahead.
one thing that didn't get answered is why our main worm we were fighting had her evil villain monologue, and she was like, "Yes, tell my enemies I'm coming. You're wondering why I'm warning them." And like, she totally shot herself in the foot. And yes, every evil villain needs a dramatic monologue at the end so that the hero can regen enough or have the spells come off cooldown and win. But like, I still didn't fully connect the dots because I felt like there was another point, but it wasn't probably connected where they were like, oh, yes, so and so had you controlled, and I didn't know until he was pulling the strings. And yeah,
Yeah, I didn't quite understand that fully either, except for the fact that their side of the war has been winning. Like it's been one win after another win after another win. So like the my guess is the reason why they did that was to kind of help keep those wins stacking up, right? Like for every piece you take off the board,
or
the
well, I guess their primary power was the binding. So in order to have a stable base, you force them into making a move sooner and not be prepared, which then they
mm,
can switch and bind them. But yeah, I
yeah,
felt like if she didn't, yeah.
yeah, because of plot. That's why. No, maybe not. But it made me wonder too a little bit. Um, and in the end, she was the only one that survived, right? Like they took a
Yeah.
number of the subworms off, and pretty much she implied that the god Crocs, or maybe the whole faction is called the Crocs, but she's the granddaughter of the evil god. So we get to see kind of the tiers of power there. And then the major, um, kind of like she's a true mage. And then when she's interacting with the main dragon, granddaughter of a god, Chicky, Dragon Poo, I don't know. I don't even remember her name. Um, just that she's our big old BA pulling the strings with the governor and everything else. But she implies that the major is approaching like Archmage, so we kind of get to see some of the structures there. Um,
Uh, I
I want to get a couple questions for you.
okay,
This was our first time reading Chris Fox. Overall,
correct.
how do you feel about the author? Interested in exploring
I
more of his books?
enjoyed the world he built where we have, potions that make sense. We have catalysts to gain new and exciting abilities. That was very exciting as well. I just, the thing that screwed me on this was the layers of overlap because for our spell suits, it was all like, oh yeah, we've got potions. And then for the drifters, it was called beer. And then the beer ended up being a potion, and as well as like the stacking for the worms because it was like, oh, it's all fauna, they're snakes. I had to, get this snake away, which I guess with Aaron at the beginning in the first god, he was all, oh, I have the power, I can see everything, I can literally create races. And then we had that fight scene where the dragon was like, I will destroy you and use you as, you know food for my babies. And I know
So,
more is going to get fleshed out. To answer your question, I thoroughly enjoyed the world. I enjoyed the promise at the beginning. The conclusion at the end was satisfying. We wrapped it up as well as we have an idea of what's going to come. Our major who set this all up, who pulled, our bacon out of the fire, is, going to have problems or reprimands
no one
because
likes burnt bacon.
politics. And then our, gruff Marine who we went back and forth with, who kicked our butt earlier, who then we had begrudging respect for, who then, you know, held the
I
major throughout the end battle, who is now a tech mage who is going to build his company. Like, I'm excited to see what comes of that, as well as, the initial slaver Chicky Poo, who we love to hate. Turns out that we really love her. And then our main guy, who's got this smug, like, I'm better than you at everything. It still hints that, like, he knows things and he's more than he appears. So I'm waiting for that Tomless reveal.
I love how I can ask you a surface level about wanting to explore more from Chris Fox, and you just give me like a quick rundown breakdown about like the good, the bad, and the ugly um, that you're analyzing for this author and other books moving forward. One of the many
Next
points,
question.
yeah, one of the many points you touched on. I'm really interested to check out more from Chris Fox, and he actually has a lot of stuff out there, including some writing books that you and I are both trying to dabble more with our own creative writing projects. So I'm tempted to check that out. Um, with the drifters and the beer comment, when I went back through it, I like the second or third time I was listening to it, I kind of took it as um like beer as
Tomato,
we
tomato.
yes, or just as you brew potions, they brew beer. So like all the things they brew are beer, but not all their beer is a potion.
Okay,
So
so
like they
varying
loaded
types of alcohol, I guess. Like, is it a hoppy? Is it not? Is
yeah,
it an
yeah.
ale?
Does it bring back your brother from the dead, or does it just, heal your broken leg? Who knows? You get a
Yeah,
slight head
differing
buzz.
effects.
Because like when they rezzed the healer, he was still drunk, but he got rezzed, right? So maybe their healing potions always have kind of like an alcoholic component
Well,
to
and
it.
I guess that's something that it didn't quite get fleshed out, but it leads to more
Hmm.
because when they're doing select spells, it talks about the elements that they're utilizing, like, for their void bolt of destruction that they took out one of the worms with or dragons with.
Hmm.
It was, hey, initialize it with void and then use flame and then do this. And then
Hmm.
there were a couple instances where they used counter spells, but they used different elements.
Hmm.
And so it was kind of almost like you can do things in different ways, which I enjoy. But the thing that got me the most was the way we weren't saying tech or AI or all of this stuff because we've
Yeah.
it's kind of one of those weird ones because in a lot of my fantasy stuff or casting a spell, you have a staff, but the variance between a spell pistol and regular ammunition rounds that other people are using, which for us is kind of like, you know, currently that would be insta death, where in reality in this, or I guess in fantasy, not reality, um, what would be death for us is nothing to their ancient, dragon scales. And
Yeah.
then we've got to use spells that are through this catalyst, but that's still, the novice ranks. But then we also fly spaceships and we utilize these spell configured, not technology
Yeah.
to cast our spells through, which is then a step up, but not. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Um,
I enjoyed the elements.
you ready for the next question?
Hmm.
And I might have to drop off cam for a little bit to troubleshoot some stuff, but then I'll be back for my response on it. So we talked about how this technically falls into fantasy genre. We talk about how it falls into military, sci-fi, space, opera, and fantasy. I would make the argument, just like it's not completely 1 foot in or 2 feet in on any of these genres. I also see that it's kind of got at least a half foot in on lit RPG. And I'd be curious your thoughts on that. Um, if you feel that there could be an argument made that it also dabbles a little bit in lit RPG, or just at least borrows a lot of concepts from that.
So I felt like
So,
there were a lot of elements that could do the lit RPG space justice, like
mhm.
waking up with no memory. That felt very much like waking up in another world kind of deal, or yeah, the disorientation between that. But it, and also with the whole like complexity of the technology, yeah, I don't really feel like it is. And it's one of those like it makes sense in the fantasy world, but it's not exactly lit RPG because for the magic, it doesn't really talk like stats. So yeah, you use your magic or your mana to cast a spell, which makes sense, but it doesn't talk the numbers. I think there are a couple spots where it mentions like, oh, that took a fourth of my magic reserve, but in this it feels more, I guess, reality or fantasy based, where it's almost like a muscle, you know. For example, you could run so far, you'd be tired and you wouldn't be able to run any further, but then give you some downtime and take a breather, whatnot, cool off, and then you could run again. And it feels like the magic is more like a muscle, which is a cool element because in the lit RPGs, it's very like static and exact and stats where you use X amount of mana for this, it recharges at X amount of rate. Where with the way it's working in this world or this realm, it's the whole concept of the woman who lifts a car off her child due to the chemicals or due to the situation where that RPG, it's exact and you're not going to get anything extra. It's more about the chess game of how to apply it. But for this, it does it justice by not, yeah.
Okay. So here's my argument for why it does have at least half a foot in lit RPG. And maybe he's just drawing some inspiration and has a background there. And maybe I'm just trying to poke your buttons that lit RPG genre is overly vague in a lot of ways.
Oh,
But
oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
here
yeah.
here's my points for it. And
Like, I could totally see this being a tabletop
yeah.
role-playing
So
game, an element.
there's definitely the feel of kind of like a D&D campaign in space, which a lot of our lit RPGs have a very similar feel and vibe to it. Dragon Lord, or not Dragon, Dungeon Lord coming to mind there. Like there's definitely more of the stat component to it, but it feels more like fantasy, in this case, sci-fi
Oh, well,
military.
that one,
So
I could see leaning the D&D route, but I guess I haven't found one that does space well.
so there's the first point on the whole vibe, right? Next point is, what is a typical party size for MMO lit RPG group?
Yeah, it's
It's
like 5
give
to
or take
6.
5, right? Sometimes 4, sometimes 6. How many tech mages do we have in this party? Just saying.
Or
Just
well,
saying.
but
Come on.
that
Come on.
follows
We got
true
we got our
for like
drifter, we got our healer, we got our we got Aaron, We got
But that's just
Cruz,
about
and we
not
got
adding too
Nara.
many components. Because, like, even if you said
Okay.
Stormlight, like, yeah, we've got a lot of people, but we still have, like, our main core of, Dalinar, Yasuna,
Yeah, yeah,
Adolin,
yeah. Okay, okay.
Kaladin. Like, that's
Here's
just a good size with not overloading you with too many BA
okay.
main slash
Devil's
side characters.
Devil's advocate. Like I'm with you there, but next level, they have a healer.
They got their front line.
They have Cruz. They have their main tank. They have Aaron, their off tank.
Yeah,
They
slash
got
damage.
they got the Drifter girl, who's our heavy damage dealer, right? With her
Yeah,
big old
the spell
hammer.
cannon. Oh
Yeah.
no, yeah, she was can't or hammer.
And then you have our ranged DPS slash scout, right? Nara.
Yeah.
So when you're building your party, we got all the party elements there. So another kind of half foot in, half foot out. And I'll give you this, like Dragonlance, they had a similar party build, right? And that's just how it goes. It doesn't necessarily make it lit
Well,
RPG, but it still has
and,
that
and
lit RPG feel. Okay, counterpoint.
or I think yes, but backwards because D&D and Dragonlance was the origin, where
Okay,
lit RPG is taking that and then adding stats to it. So
okay,
that
okay.
I guess for me that's the biggest element not included is the stats, and that's kind of what I
But
was
they got
talking about.
levels. They have tiers of
I guess he
magic.
does fire level 1 void bolts,
I'm just
and that's where
saying
like for the potions made me
that
think lit RPG,
that was
and
another one
for
of my points there.
the oh, when she counterspells the big bad worm at the end and she uses her trinket one time,
I was about to say they're like
power
we're
up things.
using our trinkets, other lit RPG lingo. They have different tiers of gear and armor.
That
Another
magically get
arguably lit
enhanced
RPG
by, yeah.
element.
Or I
Uh,
think they're very
uh,
similar. Like they're literally the same thing, except for lit RPG typically is like trapped in another world and stats intent.
but not always, and but not always. Okay. Full disclosure, I'm just poking to poke on the lit RPG um, genre bear there, but I don't think this is a lit RPG, though there are a lot of lit RPG elements that just kind of made me chuckle when we were trying to say which box does this fit in? Well,
Yeah, yeah. It
all and none,
yeah.
right? Like, and uh, as much as I gripe about that, in a lot of ways, it irked me, but in a lot of other ways, like it was just super geek. Like, yes, I have my epic fantasy elements with my love for sci-fi, with my love for military um, fiction, with my love for space operas, with my love for lit RPGs. Let's mash this all together,
Oh
and
yeah.
it
That's
works.
where
Is
for
it
me,
incredible? There's a lot of things this book could have done better, but it borrows enough and isn't too over the top on all the tropes that it was fun, and I want to continue the series.
so I think what we're trying to say is typically you have to kind of adjust your expectations for a book. And if I know the genre, and if I know it's their first book, and I know when it was made and what other big influence were impacting things at that point in time, I can kind of adjust it. But that's where this was weird for me because, like, I had a hard time adjusting my expectations. Like, I thoroughly enjoyed everything that we were doing. I enjoyed the world we're building. I I wish some things
Pacing
were
was
more fleshed
decent.
out, but at the
Yeah.
same time, 8 books, so we have plenty of time to do so. I felt, satisfied with the ending, which I guess for me is a big thing. You got to do it in such a way that wraps up certain events while making you exciting for what is to come.
So, real quick, Goodreads says 7 books in the series. I'm not sure if there's an eighth
Oh, was
coming
I
out.
saying 8?
You were saying 8, but there is 7. We have the first 4,
It was so
and
hard not to continue.
yeah, I caught the prologue of the next one because the copy we have is wrapped up in 4, um, which kind of leads me a little bit into the next question and something that I was kind of wondering before I got into that. Um, we got to see through Nara's eyes the impact of a mind wipe, how she still has some residual memories that she gets through dreams, and she's able to kind of piece back together her life.
Hmm.
Um, as much as Aaron has the subconscious of things, we haven't seen anything kind of hinting at his past, just besides what we surmise through the major of he's a war mage. He's already a tech mage before he gets the void magic.
I don't know. I would argue that we did because, like, from the beginning, when he picks up that sword and he has that like deja vu feel, and he's like, "Oh, this is," and
So
then
we know his stat sheet in a way through that, but we don't know his history, right? Like he doesn't have any actual like flashbacks through his dreams like Nara does. But there's a greater point I want to get to and get your speculation on.
okay.
Um, so he was mind wipe. The Major's brother was mind wipe. We
Mm-hmm.
learn through
Oh,
Nara before she's mind wipe that whatever his name was, the actual slave owner, trader, person, dude with the jewel eye that was keeping Nara as the equivalent to a pet.
or
Um,
is equivalent to Leia and Jabba the Hutt.
sure, yeah, we'll go with that. That's a better visual there. Um, anyway, so we learned that he would take contracts to disrupt certain things to stop people and then make extra money by taking them on as slaves, right? Like he would get hired saying, "Hey, attack this vessel, disrupt it," and then he would make extra money on the side by taking them and mind wiping them as slaves.
Mm-hmm.
So that suggests that Kaz, um, the half brother that gets turned into a hedgehog, that is actually royalty, has some history with Aaron, and that Aaron, or he could,
Well,
because
yeah,
like he,
if they came from the same ship.
if they came from the same ship, though, speculation is probably, and we know that Kaz is royalty.
Mm-hmm.
So we seem to think that he's good aligned. Um, and a lot of Aaron's power ups are because of the choices that Kaz and him made early on. Is like, hey, watch my back, I'll watch yours. Kaz pretty much adopts him as a brother and calls him brother. Like when we resurrect him, like the first thing Kaz does is, jump up naked as the day
Or
he was born, puts his back against Aaron and says, "Stand with me again, brother." Like, they're ready to fight.
yeah,
But we
I
know
wouldn't
that
say resurrect. I'd say like transform.
uh,
Anyway.
yes, sorry. You're right. Um, so we know that Kaz's mother is going to try to get his memories back. I
Mm-hmm.
potentially see and wonder if you think that Chris Fox is going to go this direction, that might add an extra layer of strife because here they're really bonded. he gets decked out with all the finest gears thanks to Kaz pretty much saying like, hey, he's a good person. But what if Kaz starts getting his memories back and they weren't buddies before this all? And what if like we
But
start finding
I
out that Aaron was actually on the other side because you have the gods meddling here that, we find out at the end this god in its dying breath with all this epic power managed to manipulate events to where the major has the resources she needs that she's only able to get because she gets Kaz back and is able to trade him for supplies. Aaron gets geared out because he tells Kaz, even though I'm free now, no longer a conscript, this is my war. And that Nara, who's able to actually undo the binding, is also there, who was a slave trader and now fighting for the light. All these things and paths and weaves in the wheel got all in the Major's lap right before this epic battle, before they were about to bind the child of a god who is like a tier higher than the granddaughter who's trying to bind him, right?
or that's 2 tiers because you've got
It,
granddaughter, dad, grandfather.
right. But the one that they were trying to bind was a child of a god. And then the one that
Oh,
we're
okay,
fighting
yeah,
against,
because the catalyst was the god, and then
yes,
the
yes,
child was. So anyway, I think what you're trying to say, or what I would like to say about that is yes, and that's one of the things that was sad, but was encouraging for the future because our main guy, Aaron, doesn't have his memories, and that was what I was talking about the whole Tomlish reveal.
mm-hmm.
But I wasn't really thinking so much the elements you were talking about, how they were essentially from the same ship, possibly. Then Mindwipe didn't know anything about each other, created a new understanding. I think it's going to be something where, due to Aaron's resilience, prior stuff, because he does have more knowledge, is going to find out more about his past or have that like click moment where it connects and he starts to unweave the spell due to his other latent magical powers that we don't know what he has.
My
Meanwhile,
speculation is along those lines.
the mage, mommy not mommy, from the other side gets Hedgehog's memories back,
Kaz.
Kaz's memories back. So I could see them doing a like at the same time but not together. And one thing that irked me that I forgot about is like we
Tell us,
take this
Peter.
human who is now a hedgehog and we just stuff him in a pouch. We
Mm-hmm.
get into a tussle, we're about to get shot, we're stuffed into a cage, and oh yeah, Hedgehog is just fine. Haven't fed him in days, nothing else is going on, but here's this hedgehog.
But
Pull him out
he's
of
a
my pocket.
magic hedgehog.
Yeah, yeah, but for we go to the commissary for food, we do all this exercise, we're talking about, the muscles and the training and the feels of firing a spell rifle. And that was one of those elements where like, yeah, it doesn't matter. It's not relative, but we didn't even feed the thing.
Well,
I guess it wasn't too
he
long.
he gets I was about to say he gets conscripted before his first 24 hours are up, right?
Or
Um
yeah, he gets transformed within the first 24 hours, and then
the major takes it over within those 24 hours and puts a spell on him, puts him to sleep,
I guess that's
something
true.
like
He could be
that.
all like hibernated or whatnot.
Yeah, or magic,
And that's
right?
fine. It was just
Um,
something that I was like, oh yeah, we did have a hedgehog in our pocket.
yeah, yeah. Um, one of the
And I
things
guess
that, oh, go ahead.
the races and the visual descriptions didn't really sell me. And that's where I had problems between like Yeah, we knew the Cheyennes or whatever were super beautiful and essentially elves, like you said, and that made sense.
Yeah.
And then the Drifters, which that's a derogatory term or something, or something else, and we got like a one-liner from our main one, but then board wasn't one, but was one, but was short. And I just like I was having trouble visualizing some of it through the
Mis-
descriptors.
Mr. Boring slash that's how you say his name, but isn't boring slash hits on anything that moves and potentially female was not a drifter.
No, no.
Kaz? No, not
Yeah,
Kaz.
yeah.
They
Or
had a
the
couple names
hammer,
that were really close together. There was a
yeah, were
female
like
drifter.
literally inverted.
Well, yeah, literally inverted, and then there was like a Cruise, a Kaz, and a Cass. Um, but yes, yes. And that's where, like, we've talked about it before. It's an art with the authors, and every author kind of has their own style between over explaining or not explaining enough.
I guess that's where I'm
And
kind of projecting because
it's,
I enjoy the logic and the understanding of over explaining.
oh,
And
oh,
like
I
you
think we
can
know.
talk raw stats at me all day and
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can enjoy that where other people don't.
And that's, I think, probably something that's really challenging as a writer, finding that balance. And
'Cause, like, it was short for the descriptions, and it kept the story moving, and we
mhm,
accomplished a lot, and oh my, was there combat. Like, we're
yeah, I
fighting
was
off
about to
these things
say,
here, and there's, we couldn't tell the size of it, and we're about to be taken out, but then now we're hiding. Oh, just kidding. I'm gonna pick up this sword. I'm gonna do all this,
did it
taekwondo stuff.
scratch your combat itch, Pete?
Yeah, yeah, there was a lot of combat. Um,
But it wasn't
Yet
nonstop.
again,
Like there
like
was
it
still
didn't
story.
flesh out the magic. But I get
Mm,
that's like what we're doing because we went to a void thing of which was a dead god and we were inside the eyeball, so scale is massive. We
yeah.
literally went in one eye, popped out the other eye, like had a battle in between, but now we're in worlds or on worlds that dragons are bigger than, but then they can shapeshift into human form and come down to us, but then they have a mid-range form where they can still be dragon-esque and like dragonborn style in combat, but then we have the metric system. I'm sorry, as filthy Americans, I was like,
I was
wait a
about to
minute,
say,
5 meters, what?
yeah, yeah.
And
We just need to learn metric. Let's be honest. This yeah. We,
yeah, yeah, it's
I
just
don't want to
not.
talk about feet fetishes. Um, but for me with this book, and we've talked about it before, where a lot of it depends on your audience, and I was really relying on the fact that he gave the subtle nod to Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman, and then there were so many parallels between Dragonlance and this that I just said, "Hey, this is Dragonlance in space with um, yeah, lit RPG combat elements to it." So when they start describing stuff, I'm like, oh yeah, they probably look like elves, right? They talk about overly pretty, almond shaped face, etc., etc. It's like, oh, they're probably like this race. I'm like, oh, they're probably like, yeah, yeah. Um, he could have
Yeah,
done
and I
better with the
guess that
description. He
that
could
was
have
one
done
of
better.
those I could
Go
have
ahead.
looked it up and like for reflex, if you say dwarf, if you say elf, if you say half gnome, if you say, any of
Yeah.
those like it's a typical common fantasy race that I already have a picture of.
Hmm.
And kudos to creating a new or unique one or one that I didn't already have knowledge of. And that's where, like, you're talking Dragonlance, it may be a common race inside that series, and we
Well,
still have plenty of time to develop it. It
mhm,
just I'm already bad enough putting names with faces that I just yeah had to go
yeah.
through it a couple times to fully picture.
I'm right there with you, and, that is one of my, complaints with it as well, that they could have done a better job, um, explaining a lot of things in there and describing a lot of things.
But I guess that's
Um,
also my big beef with I want to say Dakota Kraut. Like I enjoy what he builds, but I feel like certain things aren't fleshed out.
mhm. And it's a balance because like, as much as I enjoy Lord of the Rings, and it's been forever since I've read it, um, he could be so long-winded about time and explaining all the other details where the rest of us who have ADD and ooh shiny, then it's like, "Oh, great, like, I now know what the sky looks like on this day, but who's here?
It comes
What are we
down
doing?"
to
Like,
audience and preference.
yeah.
But that
Um,
yeah did well progressing the story.
mhm,
Did
yes.
well for okay. So one thing that irked me
Just one?
that I should just get over, or one additional plus one thing that irked me. The narrator kept saying HUD, and I know that's how it's written H period U period D period, but just say HUD.
Yeah,
Like, yeah,
yeah.
that was one
Um,
of my things.
I'm right there with you. Um, right there with you. Um, yeah. It's good though. I enjoyed it. Um,
Oh yeah.
it
Like
was
I
different yet similar enough to a lot of the stuff we like. Out of all the new series we've started in the last couple weeks, this is one that I definitely want to work back into a Geek Out session and go a little bit deeper on in the near future. We're still kind of catching our rhythm, working on getting um, different polls and feedback from you guys and collaborating. Go.
so that is one thing that I really enjoyed with this book. Oh my. The chapter titles
Oh, yes.
were accurate and gave me the feels.
Mm-hmm.
One book that I thoroughly love is probably my top lit RPG, The Land, did it kind of like a day of the week thing where it was the day and it made a lot of sense and I can understand it from a writing perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a big reveal throughout it where it was relative,
Mm-hmm.
but it just like it didn't portray what you were trying to do, and versus like I guess anime title sequences sidestep here, they sometimes give too much away where
Mm-hmm.
it's like why do I even need to watch this season because you literally showed me all the battle scenes and
Spoilers. Yeah.
yeah, but the
Next time.
titles were accurate, did great for the reread where I was like, "Oh yeah." So, good titling for your chapters.
Solid nod. Chris
Yeah.
Fox. You done good, son. We're on board for this epic ride. Um, as always, it's hard to do a full book justice in the hour that we hop on and talk. Are there any key points, key pieces you want to mention? The combat was great. I thought the character development was pretty good. Got a good diverse cast of the crew. There were some plot challenges at times, but what book doesn't have that?
There wasn't like the main I love to hate you person that we didn't kill off because like Nara, it was at the
What
beginning I loved to hate her, but
what about the
then turns
original
out she
lieutenant?
was okay. And then yeah, but she was just like, "Oh, just kidding. Bow.
Right.
You're dead."
Right.
But I mean, that was concluded. That was like I guess I was expecting the Brandon Sanderson reveal where it's like, "Oh, you love to hate this guy." Just kidding. Look at it from his perspective. We're all just trying to, get by.
We're still on book one,
Yes, yes.
and they're not super
Well, yeah,
huge
but
either.
Stormlight one. I guess that's true. Stormlight one, like we already hated Sadius.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right.
I don't know.
You're
Still a lot of books. That was just one of the elements that wasn't.
true. Very, very true.
So I
Uh,
guess it. I do love to hate a lot of the gods and how like they cast these unbelievably powerful spells that are supposed to make you all pawns or cogs in the machine.
they're
Was kind of
gods, dude.
irking.
Like everyone else is just space dust.
Though that is a unique play because typically the whole like god rope is all powerful, but T-Rex style. I have tiny little arms and I can't actually influence anything. So yeah,
Uh, yeah, yeah. We're at the stage though where we don't know to what extent the gods are still around, right? Like
or I
we
thought it was pretty much said that all the originals. Yeah, I guess I can't say all, but our main one that
we
we were
know that
fighting
some are
over at the
dead.
very end passed away, as well as we learned from the child slash guardian of the mother ended
Hmm.
up knowing that the other one in opposition that killed her also died.
Hmm.
So I think it has to do with that whole like balance thing where like they were gods, they are still powerful, they are still the catalyst where we end up getting our powers from,
Hmm.
but we're also in the midst of watching the next generation come to be and the next generation doing their power grabs and their manipulation and their building their baby not baby worm dragon mini empire.
Yes. I'm looking forward to seeing the world expand that much more in the next upcoming books. Um, but we're hitting time for when we typically try to wrap these things up and not go too long. Final thoughts on Tech Mage, the Magitech Chronicles book one by Chris Fox.
um was amazing, was a good ride, had so many different elements that I'm excited to see what is to come. Combat, thank you, combat. Um, yeah, it was hard for me to set the right hat for my expectations going forward, but rereads, I enjoyed it for what it ended up being.
Agreed. Agreed. Um, it did well, caught my interest, satisfied at the end of book one, but curious enough to continue on to book two. And with that being said, we're currently trying to stick to our 5 o'clock, 5 p.m. Eastern time every
Sunday.
Sunday. And Geek Out number 58 is going to be.
Oh, we talked about this.
You got it ready to pull up? I shot you the link.
Or that's not what you shot me. My thing is 57.
Uh, click the link
Oh,
itself.
sorry. Sorry.
Shortcut did an update.
It didn't, yeah, it was delayed.
All
Ba
good.
ba ba. I saw that and I was like, what's going on here?
All
Then
good.
yeah.
Technology
But
is fun like
then
that.
I did this, I did that. Bada bing, bada
Uh,
boom, ba
un-
bam.
Unfortunately, um, the they don't always get our audiobooks out the same time they get our
physical
Um,
books out. But
yes,
with that being said, the people who do this, Town Book Theater Live, amazing, thoroughly enjoy. It's unique the way they add like a lot of extra audio elements, as well as like they have a YouTube channel, and it's just interesting and encouraging to watch them develop and create the product.
yes, yes. Amazing ride. In our opinion, the gold standard of what audiobooks should be. New Era Online is such a fun series. Book 5 is the second to last one for this series. So,
Oh, is it?
um,
I thought it was supposed to be conclusion.
nope, nope. Signed up for his mailing list. Book 6 is supposed to come out soon with the audiobook following a couple months behind, probably just because Sound Booth Theater is so crazy busy with all their
Yeah, they,
other projects.
as well
Um,
as like this is a decent sized book, and they have multiple voice actors.
mhm. Yes, yes. A lot of fun. All hail our green overlord. And yeah, thanks for geeking out with us, guys, on this Magitech book. If you haven't already, that series Life Reset is definitely worth picking up. We're going to
Yeah,
be geeking out on it next week, 5 p.m. Sunday Eastern Standard Time.
that was one of our like origin books.
Yes,
Oh man, like I went back and looked at our live streams, and we've grown.
that we have, that we have, and many more growth for 2021. Thanks again, guys. We appreciate your support. Anticipate more content about our plans for 2021 and some changes upcoming to the channel. Your feedback is always appreciated. We hear you. We love you. We're on it. And we hope to geek out with you guys again here soon.
By
Bye.